Donald Trump met the press and he didn't like it. He walked out. We're going to break down his stunning walk off the set from Meet the Press. Plus jobs and affordability, interest rates. That's what everybody's talking about as we head into the midterms. We're going to break it all down with the Heritage Foundation's chief economist, E.J. Antoni. Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, I hope you had a great weekend. I did. Finally, some nice weather. I mean, that's what I've been looking for. Just some nice weather. Got something nice. Got out on the water 2 days in a row. You can't beat that. You know, it's beautiful. But a lot going on politically. And this week's going to be really busy. We got a primary in several states tomorrow. Maine, obviously, the big one. I want to see how much Graham Plattner pulls off because Janet Mills is still on the ballot. She's not going to win. But I think there's a lot of Democrats that want to vote in the primary and as a protest vote. We'll see what that looks like. I got a lot to say about Graham Plattner and Scott Pelley. But E.J. Antoni is going to be with us in just a second. He's the chief economist from the Heritage Foundation. Remember, he's the guy that Trump nominated to head the Bureau of Labor Statistics because there's concern about whether or not they were cooking the books. So we're going to break down everything that's going on in the economy with jobs, et cetera. Hopefully, I want to get to like data farms with him and AI and figure out how that's affecting the economy, et cetera. So a lot to get to with that. Plus, as I mentioned, the primaries are happening. So there's one in South Carolina, the big governor's race down there. Nancy Mace, the lieutenant governor, Yvette, Alan Wilson, the son of Joe Wilson's the attorney general. He's running for governor. So a lot to cover. We'll talk about that on Tuesday. By the way, a huge week. Tomorrow, Mike Nellis and Batya Ungar-Sargon are both here. We're going to break down what the state of the Democratic Party. Obviously, the Graham Plattner stuff is huge, so we'll have plenty to talk about with them. And then on the end of the week, I've got another couple shows cooking. Some things are coming together. Don't want to give it all away, but just trust me, this is a big week, and next week as well. So a lot to break down. But before I bring in E.J. Antoni, I was blown away. Now, just setting the stage. They announced they were going to Wisconsin on Friday, the White House, and Kristen Welker and her team were going to fly out to tape an interview that would air Sunday. And it was all around unbelievable. I mean, like, I've never seen anything like this. First of all, just for the record, I've said this before, I don't like the president going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, not a fan of it. And secondly, him taping interviews with Meet the Press, not a fan of it. Can he handle anything? Absolutely. The guy's taken on everybody. So it's not a question of whether or not he can do it or not. He can take on anybody. The issue is I don't like him giving oxygen to third-rate left-wing programs and hosts. I just don't get it. Why are we helping them? There's plenty of growing outlets on the right that we should be helping. And the more they have to tune into us to see it, the better, because they're going to cover it. That's the thing. You do an interview with President Donald Trump, it's going to make news. It doesn't matter who it is. So going to Meet the Press is just giving them, credibility and oxygen. And Kristen Welker's just, to be blunt, not really good at this. And they whined. It was raining during the thing. But the president went after her. And it was funny. There were two lines in here that I think were fantastic. I want to play you part of it. Take a look.
Meet the Press is crooked.
To be fair, I'm not crooked, but let's
Really?
Let's
Well,
continue.
you play right into their hands.
Let's continue.
You're either crooked or you're stupid. You play
continue.
right into their hands with this crap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But, Mr. President,
you know why I got that? Because you have no
evidence.
credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about, I want to talk about Todd
You
Blanche.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk about...
Your elections in this country, we're like a third world country.
But, sir,
your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC, and CBS, and CNN.
But, Mr. President...
You're one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits, because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know.
I've sat in the rain with you for an hour, on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press, because you know what?
Mr. President,
a country can never be great with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
Now, there's a couple things about that. When I used to do media training back in the day, they used to tell you, don't repeat the accusation. right? So I did this event once, and this is the best way to explain this, because Sam Donaldson was like our guest speaker from ABC News at this little press roundtable I did. And he always told us that as he was trying to kind of interview a hostile interviewee, he would say, you know, did you steal the cookie? And then the person would say, no, I didn't steal the cookie. And they go, there's your soundbite, right? Make them deny the accusation. And you heard Kristen Welker start that interview with, to be fair, I'm not crooked. I mean, she took the bait. She took the bait. I'm not crooked. I mean, that thing should be in meme land forever. But then at the end, she's just begging him, I traveled to Wisconsin. I came all the way here. Like, dude, you just sat there with an hour with the guy. And what she was referring to at the end was that you could hear the rain at certain parts of the interview. So they kept stopping it. And he kept saying, let's press through. Let's press through. They've got microphones on. Right? I have one here. Like, this is how it works. And you could tell there's a way to cancel out a lot of that sound. It was amazing. Like, you got the president, keep going. You don't say, can we keep pausing, keep pausing, keep pausing. And I think he had just had it. And I'm glad he walked off the set. He shouldn't have, should have walked off the set at the beginning too. Unbelievable. By the way, I just want to tell you something that happened this morning, and I tweeted that on X. And I'm literally pulling it up as we're seeing this because it reminded me. She kept saying, you haven't shown any evidence, right? This is literally a story that came out this morning. Non-citizens on voter rolls in Democratic-run state exposed. This is in New Jersey. Most non-citizens were registered as Democrats and discovered their status while pursuing naturalization. One non-citizen, who the county said was removed from the rolls in 2015, voted several times in 2000, 2001, and in the 2008 general election. Another voted in a primary in 2005 and in a municipal election in 2000. So in other words, these are people who are applying in the naturalization process and are realizing, because obviously if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be registered to vote or voting. And they're reporting, saying to the county, I apparently was registered to vote. Votes were cast in my name, but I'm not the person who did that, and I want to make sure that you know that, signing an affidavit to the Secretary of State. So either two things happened. Somebody did vote in their using their name, or they actually did it and they're just afraid of getting caught. But to argue that people aren't voting illegally is just patently not false. They are. And again, then what the press will do is shift to this argument, well, we don't know. And by the way, they've built the perfect mousetrap. Think about this. They go around all these Democratic governors and say, we need to give all of these people in this country illegally a license because it's going to help. We want to know who they are. So we'll give them a license. Well, then what do you need to vote? Oh, a license. Interesting how that works, right? And then you don't allow people to audit the rolls. So you've created the perfect mousetrap on the left. And they go, well, then there's no evidence because you've created something which is foolproof. You've given them the tools to do it. And then you won't let people audit the ability to cross-reference it. It is absolutely fascinating how this went down. Hate to break in on this discussion, but Father's Day is coming up. And if you are looking for a great gift for dad, I've got one right here for you. This is the Firecracker Farm hot salt. I'm telling you, it elevates your cooking, grilling experience to a level that I don't even know. This stuff is amazing. So if you like to add a little spice, a little kick to whatever you're cooking, and I'm talking eggs in the morning and omelets, I've done that, chicken or steak on the grill, you name it. You want one of these. These are the stainless steel grinder right here. You just push a little on the top. You can see the hot salt right in there. It's a blend of amazing hot salts. And like I said, it's not hot. It's just, I can't even describe it. It's a great elevation of the food, of flavor. It's a kick. It is unbelievable. It is fully American. They support some great organizations, military law enforcement organizations like Pipe Fitter Foundation and Op 300. They do small batches. They sell out fast, especially around Father's Day. So if you think this is going to be a great gift, or maybe you even want it for yourself, go to firecracker.farm. Firecracker.farm. Use code SPICER for a great discount before it's too late. That's firecracker.farm. Now back to the show. But I do want to bring in our guest today, EJ Antoni, is the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation to break down where we are on the economy. And then when he's done, I got to tell you a little something about Scott Pelley and Graham Plattner. So without further ado, the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, EJ Antoni. EJ, always good to see you. We had this big jobs report that came out. It exceeded expectations. I was just talking about the president's interview on Meet the Press. He paused. She said, you had a good jobs report. And he was like, no, it was a very good jobs report. And it did exceed expectations. So first question, just what did we need to know about that jobs report?
I think it was very good overall. Wasn't perfect. There were a couple of red flags. I'm happy to talk about them, but
Please.
the two parts, Sean, that I was most happy about was not only that you had a strong top line number, but then you had the last 2 months, instead of being revised down, which has become a huge problem with the statistics where they're always revised down. Finally, we had upward revisions. So that's good to see. So if you combine the jobs added for the month plus the jobs added to previous months through those revisions, it's up over 260,000 jobs. So good news there. But also, and this was a big change as well, it's the fact that the survey of households, which is where we get data like the unemployment rate, we also ask people how many folks in the household are employed. That number, the employment level, rose for the first time this year, and it was up 99,000 on the month. So that was also a welcomed change. Now, once we go beyond those two headlines, though, again, you do see a few red flags, one of which is the fact that all of the net job growth that we saw last month was actually part-time work, and full-time jobs actually declined slightly. That's the opposite of the mix we would like to see. We want to see more folks getting good paying full-time jobs with benefits, right? And having to rely less on gig work. So we'll have to wait and see over the coming months if that's just a temporary blip. It could be related to things like the World Cup. A lot of people picking up jobs in leisure and hospitality, accommodations, and those types of service sector jobs.
So you mentioned the red flags. What are the red flags in your opinion?
Well,
just
one
the
of which
part-time
is
thing?
Yeah, that would be one of them. Another one, Sean, is the fact that the progress we were making in terms of more jobs going to native-born Americans as opposed to foreign-born workers, that progress seems to have really stopped over the last several months. Now, some folks are attributing that to change in immigration enforcement policy. I'm not quite sure if that's the case or not, but what I can say is just what the data speak to, which is the fact that native-born Americans were no longer seeing the big job growth numbers that we saw during the first year of this Trump administration. So again, that's something that we want to keep a close eye on in the coming months to see if we once again pick up in that job growth among native-born Americans. Because we remember, going back to the Biden administration, we were seeing job growth, but for a lot of his administration, it was going entirely to foreign-born workers. Native-born Americans were actually falling behind under Biden.
And we know that because how? Like, so in other words, like if I go into the workforce, I was born in the United States. How does the Bureau of Labor Statistics know that I'm born here versus somebody that was born somewhere else or just came here?
We get all that through survey data. And okay. Again, this is where I think it's really important to acknowledge something that the Bureau of Labor Statistics themselves acknowledges, which is that nowhere in any of these surveys, whether they're surveying individuals at home or surveying employers at a place of business, never do they ask anything about legal status. So while we arguably have good numbers about whether a person is a foreign-born worker or a native-born American, what we don't have good data on, Sean, is how many of those foreign-born workers are actually illegal aliens. But even the Bureau of Labor Statistics acknowledges, it's right there on their website, that there is an unknown number of illegal aliens within that data set. And it's no surprise either that those numbers exploded under Biden. And so we can only assume, given the chaos that we saw at the border, that the number of illegal aliens being included in those statistics also was growing.
All right, guys, don't mean to interrupt the show, but I got to tell you, you know what I have done to make sleep a priority in my wellness journey. It is critical. I'm not in my 20s anymore where I could stay up late, wake up early, and just power through the day. I need a great night's sleep. And one of the things that I have changed in my routine to ensure I get one is by adding Beam's Dream Powder every single night. I take a scoop of this 30 minutes before I go to bed, and I have a great night's sleep. I stay asleep, fall asleep quick, and wake up feeling ready to go. I take one scoop, put it in some water. I put it in the microwave for 30 seconds. Some people drink it straight. Some people add milk. I don't really care. It doesn't matter what flavor you choose or how long you put it in the microwave or not. You are going to get the same results. It's got 5 all-natural ingredients: reishi, apigenin, L-theanine, magnesium, and melatonin in one amazing blend. I would drink Beam's Dream Powder all day long if it didn't do that good of a job of putting you to sleep. So if you're in a place where you really want to make sleep a priority, go to shopbeam, B-E-A-M, shopbeam.com/Spicer and use code Spicer to take my deal for up to 40% off. That's the best deal I've ever heard Beam give. I don't know when it'll end, so go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code Spicer for 40% off. Now back to the show. I mentioned at the top, you were obviously President Trump's choice to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Would you have changed that?
Absolutely. I certainly would have put more. I would have tried to make the surveys more granular, not less. I would have tried to get more information out of them. Again, not less. And the other thing is, I would have also made a big push to automate a lot of this. Sean, it's really a shame how so much of this data is actually available. The private sector already has it. Sometimes other parts of the government already have it. But one of the things that Elon Musk's Doge illustrated so painfully for us was that you can have multiple government systems that simply never talk to each other. And so the information remains siloed in one area and never gets handed to another department, another agency, or sometimes even a different segment within the same department or agency. And that's something that just has to change. I'm hoping the next commissioner does actually do that.
Okay. You mentioned the upward revisions. That jumped out at me because we have seen downward revisions. And those are in previous months. So one, does that still reveal the part-time nature in the previous returns? And two, is this something that you think we're going to see as a trend, meaning upward revisions, or is this an anomaly, or how will and when will we know that?
Well, we'll have to wait, Sean, taking that last question first. We'll have to wait for several more months to try to get a feel of whether or not the upward revisions is really just kind of a one-off, and then we're right back into that pattern of the constant downward revisions. What you really want to see ultimately with the revisions, Sean, is what we like to call a random walk, which is basically a fancy way of saying it's going to bounce up and down, right? It'll be up some months, down other months. The revisions, however, are just going to average out to zero in the long run, and they're going to be small. That's the other thing we like to see, because the smaller those revisions are, that means the very, very accurate final assessment was also very close to that initial assessment. We don't want the initial assessment to be ridiculously off. We want it to be reasonably accurate. So again, we want the revisions to be essentially random, some up, some down, but small overall. And I think it's going to take several more months to see, again, is this a change or is it really just a one-off?
Interesting. So I have said forever, and you and I might have even talked about this, but I believe that the core issue that people vote on isn't some statistic, but how they feel themselves. Do I, Sean, or do you, EJ, feel like I'm doing okay, right? So it's not a statistic. It's, do I feel like I'm putting some money away? Do I feel secure in my job? Right? That's the issue. It's a gut, visceral issue that people feel. Based on what you're seeing, we keep hearing in the media how people are not feeling or seeing all these prices. I see it in the gas. That's obvious. But is this an overblown media issue, this affordability issue, or is it really something that when we look in, we realize that there's a lot of churn in the labor market, or that inflation's taking a bite out of people's wallets? When you try to break that down, how much of it is real and how much of it is the media hyping an issue?
Sean, I am so glad you brought this up. You raised such a great question here. Look, at the end of the day, I think the reason the media is harping on affordability so much right now is just because Donald Trump's in office, right? And they hate Donald Trump. But the affordability crisis that we're facing today was just as real under the Biden administration, but they never used that word because their preferred candidate had won the election and was in office and everything. So obviously, again, they're harping on it right now because Trump is in office. They didn't say a peep before because Biden was in office. But the reality is people were hurting then just as they're hurting now. And we know that by going through the numbers. Now, to your point, Sean, I think you're absolutely right here. The statistics are not ultimately what matter from the perspective of individuals are really caring how they feel. Do they have enough money left at the end of the month? Right. But the statistics can really help inform us as to what's going on there. One of the key numbers is not just the size of people's paychecks, but what can those paychecks actually buy? What we saw under the Biden administration was that the average American's weekly paycheck, adjusted for inflation, or as we like to say in real terms, shrunk. And it fell by the time he left office compared to when he took office, it fell about 4 percentage points. Now, what happened in Trump's first year? Well, it actually rose 2 percentage points. In other words, in just 1 year, Trump made up for half of the losses from the Biden term. Now, unfortunately, what has happened since the start of the Iran war is that we've given up more than half of that. In other words, the average American's weekly paycheck only buys slightly more, not even a whole percentage point more today than it did when President Trump took office. And again, that's not something that has to do so much with the labor market and wage growth as it does just simply the impact of things like oil prices as a result of the conflict with Iran. But it is still what is driving the affordability crisis and people's negative perceptions about the economy. And it's part of the reason why, if we look at some other figures, all of these data really line up very well together, Sean. You see the savings rate tumbling because people they don't have enough money left at the end of the month to save. They're spending it all on essentials. Also, we're seeing consumer credit really, really spike. In other words, people are relying a lot on credit cards to make ends meet. And this might be some of what we're seeing in those jobs numbers, where you are seeing people take on multiple part-time jobs because they're taking on a gig at night or on the weekends, whatever the case may be, to bring in some extra money to cope with the higher prices that again, are all stemming from the Iran war. So it doesn't really seem like it's something that originates with the labor market in particular, or this administration's tax and regulatory policies, which have been phenomenal. This is strictly the result of the Iran war.
All right, need to jump in and tell you about a warning that HHS Secretary Bobby Kennedy has made. He has announced that it's regulatory malpractice, his words, regulatory malpractice, that we're not already doing early Alzheimer's screening. And he's absolutely right, because just from a political standpoint, 4 out of 5 voters say they're more likely to support a candidate who prioritizes better access to Alzheimer's detection, diagnosis, and treatment. So many of us know a family member, a friend, a colleague that has been dealing with Alzheimer's. But the healthcare system is opting for late-stage crisis care over early intervention that could slow the disease. Right now, more than 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's, and that number is apparently possible to double by 2060. Families are tired. Medicare and Medicaid can't afford it. Waiting to intervene is setting up for a massive crisis that we can solve through early detection. We have the tools, simple blood tests that can identify risk years before the symptoms hit. 86% of Republicans support expanded Medicare coverage for tests and treatment. The tools are there. Now policymakers need to unleash them. Join the fight. Add your name. Learn more at marketinstitute.org. Marketinstitute.org. Now back to the show. You have this great chart that you tweeted out. Another $11.6 billion on credit cards in April, the largest month-over-month jump since November. That's a statistic. I mean, to your point, if I'm putting more and more of the things, my essentials, on a credit card, that should be a warning sign, shouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you really hit the nail on the head there. You're putting essentials on credit cards. I'll tell you just an anecdote, and granted, it's only an anecdote, but still, yeah, I think it, again, aligns well with the macro level data we're seeing. I was in Manhattan the other day, and the lady in front of me is buying a donut, and she had to use one of those buy now, pay later services on her
What?
phone. So she wasn't using like her debit card or a credit card on her phone. You know, you can have it saved in your Apple Wallet, right? She was actually using buy now, pay later for a donut. So this is clearly an example of somebody who has no cash in the bank, is completely tapped out, and sadly is probably maxed out her credit cards as well. And one of the things that's very concerning with buy now, pay later is the fact that the lack of regulation means we don't exactly know how big of a market that is. We know the quality of the debt is not very good, but we don't know the quantity. We don't know how big the problem has gotten. What we do know, sadly, is that it's getting worse today.
Again, if you're a politician running for re-election, these are the kind of things that might be tells, because to your point, you say, oh, we have a great jobs report. True. But at the same time, if I knew that a lot of my voters were carrying more and more credit card debt because they couldn't pay for essentials, that's a lot more of a real situation. And I also was looking that where are we like on manufacturing? Because we've talked a lot about jobs coming back, investment, foreign direct investment, but there is a sense, at least, that the U.S. manufacturing sector has been rebounding, even as all these gas prices surge. But what do we, when you look under the hood there, what do you see?
Sean, again, I'm really glad you raised this issue as well. This is a great point here, because so many of the president's detractors have just been beating him over the head with this data point that manufacturing jobs are lower today than when the president took office. And sure, that's true. But what they don't tell you is that manufacturing has been declining. Manufacturing jobs, that is, has been declining ever since January of 2023. In other words, we are 3 years into a downward trend. 2 full years of manufacturing jobs being hemorrhaged out of this country before President Trump was even inaugurated. So the idea that somehow he's solely responsible for the manufacturing decline, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense. A quick temporal check on the data tells you that simply can't be the case. How was he causing America to lose manufacturing jobs 2 years before he even took office? Clearly, that's a Biden administration problem, right? But what we have seen,
but I guess the question is, and that's fair. Not fair. That's true. But here's my question. We keep talking about all this investment that came into the United States. I get it takes time, right, to build a plant or to manufacture something. But shouldn't we be seeing some of the uptick?
We should. And actually, in this last report, turns out we are. What we've been seeing for several months now has been higher construction numbers, because obviously you have to build those factories before those factories can employ manufacturing workers. So we saw the predictable increase in construction jobs. That's good news. And now what we're seeing is finally, not only have we stopped losing manufacturing jobs on net, but we are now adding on net. And so thus far this year, 2026, we are to the good. Now, again, we haven't made up for the last 3 years of declines yet, but we are finally adding manufacturing jobs. It is going to be something that we keep a very close eye on, though, Sean, because we want to make sure that trend actually continues as this administration continues, for example, refining their tariff strategy.
We have a new chairman of the Fed. The president is very clear that he wants interest rate cuts. This is how he described what he believes would happen if we have more interest rate cuts on Meet the Press. Take a listen.
After this month's jobs report, economists now say it's possible the Fed may have to raise rates. Do you think that's possible? And what would your reaction be, sir?
So I'm of a different feeling. I think Kevin's fantastic, and I want him to do whatever he wants. I don't want to have a big influence on him. But we had a great report. We're doing great. And it's unfair that whenever you do great, they want to raise interest rates. It should be the opposite way. You know, if you go back 15 or 20 years, when you had good reports, the market went up. Nowadays, when you have good reports, the market goes down because they think they're going to raise interest rates. There's no reason to raise interest rates. The country becomes great. We built the country by doing great and having rates low. What they do is when they raise interest rates, they try and kill success. I don't want to kill success. We should actually lower interest rates. Now, if inflation comes, and you know, people live with inflation, but if inflation comes, what happens is you stamp it out.
So, EJ, what is your take on this? Should the Fed cut rates to do what the president wants, Or is it going to be, as Welker described it, because we're doing well, they actually try to slow this thing down by raising rates?
Well, Sean, this goes back to the first Trump administration, why the Trump economic miracle was exactly that, a miracle. We forget that basically for the first 3 full years before COVID, the first 3 full years of President Trump's first administration, the Fed was tightening. They were raising rates. They were selling off the balance sheet. In other words, everything they were doing was to try to restrict economic activity, restrict monetary growth. They were really stomping on the brake pretty darn hard. And so, again, it's a miracle that the president was able to manage the growth rates that he did and the job growth that he did, due to that tax and regulatory agenda, due to his supply side efforts. So, look, the president is absolutely correct here that the whole idea of the Phillips curve, as they talk about in economics, it's nonsense. This idea that if people are productive and they're working and they have money, that somehow that's going to cause inflation. No, what causes inflation is the government spending, borrowing, and printing too much money. That's it. It is not a growing economy. A growing economy, having more products and services, actually helps soak up excess liquidity. In other words, it creates downward pressure on inflation, not upward pressure. So I say all this to say, Sean, that the new chair, Kevin Warsh, I think really understands this issue. Chairman Warsh understands the fact that supply side economics does not cause inflation. It is part of the reason why in the 80s, it wasn't just the Fed, it was also the activity of the federal government led by Ronald Reagan that helped break the back of inflation. It was a growing economy that, again, produced more products and services to absorb all of the excess liquidity. Inflation is fundamentally a problem of too much money chasing too few products and services. So if you increase the products and services in the economy, it puts downward pressure on inflation, not upward pressure. That's something that both the president and Chairman Warsh understand. So I think we're in good hands here.
What is the latest on inflation? We saw a report the other day that came out, and I was kind of confused because month over month, it didn't look like it's raising a lot, but Dems tried to make a big issue of the overall increase online. It doesn't seem to me, at least as a consumer, when I go to the grocery store, with the exception of gas, which frankly is coming down, I don't see goods and services getting more expensive at any alarming rate. And again, I'm a pretty cheap guy when I go to the supermarket, right? It's like I'm looking at what something costs. What do the numbers show?
Well, the numbers definitely show an uptick. And again, that is due, as you rightly pointed out, primarily to higher energy prices, gas, diesel, jet fuel, right? And this, of course, is all stemming from the Iran war. None of this was an issue before the Iran war. Energy prices were extraordinarily low. It was this administration's pro-energy, pro-domestic reliable energy agenda that really helped put downward pressure on things like prices at the pump. And one of the reasons why the president was able to make such good progress on inflation during his first year, Sean, was the fact that energy affects the price of everything we do and everything we buy. So you put downward pressure on prices at the pump, and it ends up reducing prices everywhere throughout the economy. And this is part of the reason why, as an economist, I look at something like the Iran war as a bit of a tragedy, because I saw that looking at supply chain data, looking at input prices, a lot of consumer prices were actually set to start not just stop increasing, but they were set to start declining late in the summer, into the fall, and even into the early winter of this year. And now, unfortunately, with higher energy prices, that's all going to be reversed. So when we look at the inflationary forecast right now, Sean, we're not only seeing elevated inflation today due directly to energy prices, but we're also looking at those higher energy prices kind of trickling down throughout the rest of the economy and increasing a lot of other consumer prices in the coming months.
Okay, you say in the coming months, right? Obviously, for what I care and what I do right now, I need things to be looking really good in September, actually all of September. And then, because most people start voting in maybe part of October. So if you had to look into a crystal ball and put a guesstimate as to where we are in early September to early October, where do things look like they're headed?
Unfortunately, on that short of a time frame, Sean, I think we're still going to be in a bit of a tough spot here. Look, even if people need to understand that even if the Strait of Hormuz were to get open today, literally today, and you had oil start to flow in the coming days, it'll take weeks, sometimes more than a month, for that oil to get from the Persian Gulf to different ports in places like East Asia or Europe, right? Or even sometimes the Gulf of America, right? Because some of that oil would ordinarily come to our refineries. So what's then going to happen is all of the depleted energy reserves around the world. So in the United States, we have not only private stocks, but then we have a strategic petroleum reserve. All of these depleted reserves are going to have to get refilled. So you're going to replace a negative supply shock with a positive demand shock. Both of those do the same thing. They put upward pressure on prices. At the same time, when it comes to prices at the pump, refineries right now have been running at full tilt. They're over 95% capacity, so that's basically considered at the top of the range. And they've been delaying critical maintenance for weeks now. That means that all of those maintenance needs are going to catch up when they finally do actually, again, open the strait and get the oil flowing again. So this all translates into higher prices in the future. In other words, as one shock goes away, it's going to more or less be replaced by another shock. So it's going to take many, many months, even after the strait opens, until I think we get back to anything resembling normal.
The energy executives last week were apparently running around or sounding the alarm that we're depleting all of these reserves, and we might be nearing a point where if we don't get the strait opened, that prices really start to get jacked up. Is that something that concerns you as well?
Oh, certainly, Sean. Absolutely. Because look, what we've been doing right now, and I think this is why a lot of the people who were kind of being hyperbolic and saying oil is going to hit 200 any day now, this is what they were very clearly ignoring. It's the fact that, look, we do have a lot of reserves. And not only do we have reserves explicitly so, but our oil supply chains actually have, you can think of them as built-in reserves. For example, one of the big facilities at Cushing, Oklahoma, you have these massive tanks where there's oil constantly flowing in and oil constantly being piped out. And what they try to do is keep that oil at pretty high levels so that in case you have any temporary disruptions in terms of the oil coming in, there's always plenty to go out. And what they've been doing is allowing those levels to drop in order to, again, give some of that cushion, replace some of that lost supply. But you're approaching a point where you can't let the oil levels go any lower, because otherwise you are going to start literally sucking them dry at certain points. In other words, the oil going out on certain days will exceed the oil coming in. And that's where you do start running into some serious logistical problems. And that is then when refineries are in an absolute scramble to pay whatever they can to get product in the door to keep the refinery operational. And that's when spot prices really spike. You get into what we call backwardation, meaning the price to get product in the door today is way higher than what you're willing to pay many months into the future. And then that's when you are really worried about big price spikes at the pump. Now, we're not there yet. I want to be clear. So I don't want people to rush out and immediately try to fill their tanks today. That's not the point. But the point is that the kind of path we're on right now, Sean, is unsustainable. So we hope and pray the conflict does get wrapped up very, very soon.
That's what I was going to ask you, though. It's like, how concerning is, I know over the weekend we saw some more bombings. Like, how critical is opening this strait to our long-term future? And like, when you say not that big of a deal, like, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 2 months? Like, how big of a problem is the Strait of Hormuz in this equation?
It is the problem, Sean. Look, at the end of the day, the different countries in the Middle East, they've been able to reroute some of their oil out of the region via other mechanisms like the pipeline that runs across Saudi Arabia, for example. But that's very limited in its total volume compared to the amount of flows that were coming out of the strait. And we do keep hearing stories of different ships running the strait basically and making it out alive. And thank God for the people on board that was the case, that they made it out alive. But all of these flows, again, they pale in comparison to the sheer amount of volume that was going through the strait previously. But, Sean, it's not just oil. There are all these byproducts of oil and natural gas, of the drilling and production process, et cetera, that people are not talking very much about. And they're things that we don't have critical reserves for. I know some analysts have mentioned helium as one of them. There's worries about things like sulfuric acid, and the list goes on and on. And all of these are different inputs in other products like copper, like semiconductors. We're getting increasingly worried about different things in the chemical industry, different basic blend stocks to make all kinds of plastics. So it's not just a matter of the oil itself that's getting impacted here, but the longer this goes on for, the more we're looking at severely negative impacts in other industries as well, particularly those, again, where you just simply don't have reserves. And when we look at those markets in particular, Sean, that's where we see supply chain disruptions already baked into the cake that are going to cause higher prices several months into the future.
Can I ask you, we talk about these costs. One of the big things that's really boiled up on a bipartisan basis is the cost of AI and how we need these data centers to power. We need the energy to power all of them. So can you just give us what's the real story? What do we need to know? Because it's like people, there's a concern about AI, then there's concerns about the data center and the energy pricers that will skyrocket potentially if consumers see more and more of these data centers. So what do we need to know about the impact that these data centers and AI is going to have on energy costs?
The big thing to, I think, recognize here, Sean, is the fact that, yes, the AI data centers represent a big increase in the demand for electricity, but we have to look at what's been happening to the supply side of that equation. We had 4 years of the Biden administration just ramming down everybody's throats their whole green energy agenda. And so they were doing things like shutting down coal plants, shutting down nuclear plants, denying permits for those things. Same thing with natural gas. And all of that resulted in less reliable energy on the grid. And instead, what happened? Well, they were pushing everybody to build wind and solar generation, except those things are not reliable. They are not at all cost effective. And so now what you're looking at is this deadly combination of higher demand, but also lower supply, at least lower reliable supply. And the cost of that supply, again, has gone up dramatically. So it's not so much a question of what are these data centers doing to the price of electricity. It's what's going on with our supply side. Look at all of our major competitors around the world. Economies like India, economies like China, they are building coal plants. They're just going gangbusters. They're adding nuclear. They're doing natural gas. They're doing it all. And what are we doing here? We're hamstringing ourselves.
Right.
We have to get back again to reliable, efficient power generation, because at the end of the day, AI, sure, you can use it for making like funny videos and all that stuff, but it's also the new arms race. Right. We forget that this goes far beyond just cute or funny civilian applications. There are military applications here too. And so as the next arms race, really, it's not the next arms race, it's the current arms race, I should say, Sean, we have to look at it that way, and we have to view it as a race that we have to win against China. And sure enough, the different kind of Chinese Communist Party apparatchiks here in the United States, they're one of the primary funders of the campaign against AI data centers. And that's something that I think we should all keep in mind and wonder, why are they doing that?
By the way, I'm glad you mentioned nuclear. Like, this to me is such a no-brainer, not just the coal-fired plants, but the nuclear aspect of this is so critical to how we power the future. And again, if you really care about the environment, as far as I'm concerned, that's the smartest way to do this stuff. So I'm glad you brought it up. EJ, always love the insight you bring to the discussion and kind of tearing all of the media hype and narratives away from what's really happening in the economy. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right. I always love when EJ comes. He cuts through the clutter and gives us some clarity on the economy. I will say this. People do vote, like I was talking about, and his concern about where the economy is going and how long it's going to take does worry me. When you start putting all that money on your credit card, that should be a serious tell to politicians. That people, they can say all they want or have a job, but obviously if you're spending a lot of stuff on a credit card, and again, I'm not getting into like, maybe they're not spending it the right way, but the reality is that means that they're not excited. Anyway, speaking of a guy who's probably not excited, Scott Pelley, as I told you from CBS's 60 Minutes, got fired. He did an interview, and if you think this guy is out of touch, arrogant, and elitist, he made sure that he lived up to those expectations. He did an interview where he talked about how Barry Weiss, who's his boss's boss, needs to be fired. Take a listen to some of this.
Do you think Barry Weiss needs to be removed?
Oh, gosh, yes. Look, she's a lovely person. And her free press organization that she founded has been very successful. She's proven that. Great for her. But television's not her thing. She brings an ideology into CBS News where that is just anathema. And so it's a terrible fit. It's probably not her fault, but it's just a terrible fit. She doesn't know television. She doesn't understand how it works. She doesn't have management experience for a large organization like CBS News. So, yes, I do think that we would be far better off without her. Maybe she goes back to the free press and has a sterling career. But this is like somebody walking up to me and saying, there's a 747. There are 400 people on it. We need you to fly it to Paris. I'm going to decline because I don't have a clue. And it would have been so much better if Barry Weiss had been offered this job and said, oh, that's not for me. I don't know how to do that.
I mean, this guy is so arrogant. Like a 7 years. She ran a successful and built a huge news organization, but she hasn't done television like I have. So and he put up this picture of him sailing this weekend like he's free. Like he's such an arrogant, elite, out of touch narcissist. I can't believe it. The other big issue over the weekend, oh, by the way, is the continued fallout of Graham Plattner, the Democratic Senate candidate from Maine who faces a primary tomorrow. John Fetterman, though, had the line of the weekend. Take a listen.
Okay, here's my theory. My theory is that with each of these revelations, with your Democratic colleagues, it actually enhances his stature in this strange way. Because they, for lack of a better descriptor, they want a junkyard dog. They want a street fighter who's willing to knee President Trump in the groin if given the choice. And that's if given the option. And that's the way he presents himself.
No. Being a dirtbag is not authentic. Being a dirtbag is being a dirtbag.
I love that line. Being a dirtbag is being a dirtbag. It's not authentic. And he's absolutely right. This guy is such a phony. And he can't have it both ways. He can't say that I had all these shortcomings and failings and seek redemption, but none of it's true. Which is it? Is it none of it true? Or is it you're asking for forgiveness because you've done 80 things that are completely repugnant? It's amazing. And we'll find out how much the people of Maine want somebody like that to represent them in the United States Senate. Anyway, what a way to kick off the week. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to EJ for being here. Tomorrow, a great panel. Mike Nellis and Batya Ungar-Sargon are going to come here and give me the Democratic perspective on a bunch of these issues and what has changed on Plattner, why they can suddenly do this. Plus, I want to get into a lot of the key 2020-28 front runners and where they think they all are. So it's going to be amazing. We got a great week lined up for you. Thanks for being here. See you tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.